Why do Jews vote for Democrats when the left has become so hostile to Jews? That's the subject of my brand new book, The Jews and the Left, which comes out in just 3 days. It's a tale of love and betrayal, explaining why 100 years ago, Jews threw their lot in with the left, and why the left decided it no longer wants Jews unless they are willing to bend the knee and denounce their own people, which, sadly, many are. Among other reasons, Jews gravitated to the left because they saw themselves as an oppressed minority, an immigrant community like others in America. We weren't. We were never immigrants, and we were never oppressed here. We were seen by the founding fathers and our Christian neighbors as founding partners in the creation of this great nation. There was never an America without Jews who arrived on these shores in 1654 and never left. And on the 250th anniversary of our homeland, we owe it to ourselves, our ancestors, and future generations to tell that story and to reclaim that heritage. That's the story I tell in my book, and I hope you'll pick up a copy. In the meantime, here to discuss is the great Ben Shapiro. Ben, welcome. Thank you for joining me. And let me tell you why I wanted you specifically here to talk about this topic. When I was writing my book, I was anticipating what would be the biggest objection I would get to the thesis. And I decided it would be, people would say, well, sure, maybe there are a few people who don't like Israel on the left, but the real anti-Semitism is on the right. And the truth is, that's nonsense. There was some rising anti-Semitism on the right, but because of people like you, Ben, that was put to rest. You drew a line in the sand along with President Trump and many senators and congresspeople in the GOP who have been on this very show saying absolutely not on our watch, not in our name. We will not allow this to proliferate on our side. And so I just wanted to have you on to talk about this. What made you do that? How did you know that that's where the American people were at when so many were trying to convince us the opposite?
You know, I've spent my entire career wearing a yarmulke in public life, and anti-Semitism has just not been a major factor in my public life until sort of the rise of an internet culture that got rid of all boundaries and borders around decency. And so I really never believed that the American people are anti-Semitic or even okay with anti-Semitism. That's particularly true on the right, which has been my ideological home literally my entire career. I'm not somebody who moved left to right. I was right from the time I was 17 years old. And so the fact that the American people are sort of what I thought they were is not particularly shocking to me. I am shocked by the ingestion, as you mentioned in your book, and congrats on the book, of the entire anti-Semitic worldview into the left in a thoroughgoing fashion, to the point where it has basically become a feature, not a bug. If you're a candidate who does not traffic in borderline anti-Semitism or anti-Semitism openly, then you are now seen as anathema to the party. You're somebody who probably ought not run for higher office. And so you're seeing every major Democrat now basically suggest that if you accept money from AIPAC, this means that you're a tool of the Zionists or of foreign influence. You see members of the Democratic Party who certainly know better, suggesting that Israel committed a genocide when they clearly did not commit a genocide. They're doing all of that because it has become part and parcel of the left-wing worldview to suggest that anyone who is successful is an exploiter and a victimizer. And internationally, that means that Israel is an exploiter and a victimizer. And therefore, you must come out against Israel, which, of course, is repressive and exploitative and all the rest. And Jews are just a sort of stand-in for that.
Mm-hmm. Now, there was a little bit of good news on the left this week. The sex therapist in Texas who made the cornerstone of her runoff this idea that she was going to intern and castrate American Zionists. She lost by 30 points. Is that a sign that the left is learning some lessons on this front?
I think that they are still requiring a little more subtlety than that. So I'm not sure that the left has learned a lot of lessons, but I think that there's still a difference for the left between Zohar Mamdani playing pretty open footsie with anti-Semitism and terror support, and somebody openly suggesting Holocaust-level genocidal intent. And so I think that the Democrats are safely resting between those two positions. But I don't think that this is a sign that anti-Semitism on the left is about to go into remission or anything.
Of course, Mamdani refusing to attend the Israel Day parade, a slap in the face to millions of New Yorkers, Jewish New Yorkers. What they like to say is we don't have a problem with Jews. We revere the Jewish faith, is the way that they put it. We just have a problem with Israel. Explain why that's so fallacious.
So first of all, I think that we have to explain to people what Zionism is and what it was. So the traditional way that people talk about Zionism is they say that Zionism is the belief that there is a Jewish right to self-determination in their historic homeland. I actually think that that's not what Zionism is, because the reality is that that's an argument that you make in 1920 before there is a state of Israel. There's been a state of Israel for almost 80 years at this point. And so you can argue before a baby is conceived about whether a baby ought to be conceived. But once the baby is 80 years old, you probably ought to stop talking about whether the baby ever ought to have been conceived or whether the 80-year-old person ought to be killed. Because what Zionism now is the proposition that Israel deserves to continue to exist. And so anti-Zionism, therefore, would be the proposition that Israel ought to be destroyed, that there ought not be a Jewish state in the Middle East, that it ought to be extirpated. And that would involve, just practically speaking, the murder or subjugation of some 8 million Jews living in the Middle East. And in order to come up with that proposition, you have to lie about Israel. It's the only way to do it, because you've called for the extirpation of no other state on planet Earth. You've said nothing about Japan, which is significantly more ethnically homogenous, for example, than the state of Israel. You said nothing about the myriad of Muslim states on planet Earth or the myriad of Christian states on planet Earth. If you are picking Israel out of a hat and you are saying it alone ought to be destroyed, then you have to make the case why Israel is such an anomaly, why it's so inherently evil. And in order to do that, you must lie. And you must not only lie, you must also claim that Israel is engaged in a gigantic conspiracy to confuse the world, that it has to engage in some sort of massive conspiracy in order to control all of global events, that the Jews are in control of the media, and that they're rotting people's brains and changing people's minds, that they're in control of the Benjamins. And this is how you move directly from anti-Zionism, the proposition that Israel ought to be destroyed, to anti-Semitism, the idea that Jews, or pro-Israel people, because, again, the number of Jews who believe that Israel ought to be destroyed is vanishingly low, shall we say. That you have to make the case that basically, the Jewish people are in control of everything. That's how you've been bamboozled into believing that Israel ought to continue to exist, and that is just rote anti-Semitism.
Ben Shapiro, God bless and protect you. Thank you so much for joining me to talk about my book. And the rest of you, pick up a copy now. You can pre-order it. It will be out in a couple of days, The Jews and the Left, and I really hope you enjoy it.
Thank you for watching. Subscribe below and download our NewsNation app right now on your phone, and you will get fact-based, unbiased news for all Americans.